Nothing I'm about to discuss should ever be interpreted as defending, minimizing, or excusing inappropriate comments about children or any other harmful act. I do not condone that behavior in any way, shape, or form. There is no ambiguity there. Tonight is not about defending offensive comments. It's not about excusing anyone's conduct. It's about reasoning. It's about consistency. And when I use the word consistency, I mean applying the same principle to similar situations, regardless of who the person is. If the standard changes depending on whether someone is a friend or an opponent, and then the question becomes whether we're applying a principle or simply making an exception. It's about communication and whether people actually answer the questions they're asked. And it's about whether the same standards are applied equally, regardless of who's involved. We can condemn inappropriate conduct while also examining the logic and the arguments and the principles that emerge from the discussion. So, as you listen tonight, don't confuse, please, analyzing an argument with endorsing conduct. That's not the same. So now we can go ahead and get into analyze this mess. So I worked through the transcript, and one thought that kept coming back to me. Sometimes two intelligent people can spend an hour arguing without even having or ever having the same conversation. Have you ever experienced that? I believe that's exactly what happened here. There was one question that Maggie kept returning to over and over again. She wasn't really asking whether Ben's comments were offensive. That was stated. And she wasn't asking whether Ben deserved criticism. She wasn't asking whether Phantom had ever condemned Ben as this main question. She was asking one question over and over again. Why did you pursue Lacey so aggressively, but you didn't pursue Ben in the same way? Now, let's stop right there. because I think that's where this entire discussion begins. That question isn't really about Ben. It isn't really about Lacey. Fair use commentary for education, for criticism, for news reporting, for teaching, for entertainment purposes only. I think it's about consistency. It was about whether the same standard is being applied to different people. And here's where I think the conversation immediately started to separate. Maggie was asking about consistency, and Phantom is answering about conduct. That's not the same conversation. One person is asking, why did you respond differently? The other person is answering, here's what I did. Two completely different questions. And once I realized that, the entire discussion suddenly made much more sense to me. It wasn't simply an argument. It was two people debating different issues while believing they were debating the same one. Maybe you heard something different. That's what usually happens. So this is my opinion, my perspective. All right. So before we examine or look at Phantom, we need to examine what happened between the two. I want to establish something important. This isn't the first time Maggie has discussed these issues. I went back and reviewed an earlier live stream. Why? Because before we can decide whether someone is being consistent, we have to know what their principles actually are. And in that earlier discussion, Maggie repeatedly expressed several principles. She said, I'm not the police. She said, I don't want to police people. She said, adults are entitled to make their own decisions. She said, moderators can moderate whatever they choose or wherever they choose. She said she doesn't control anyone. She even acknowledged that there were moments where she felt she hadn't been perfectly consistent with those principles. So let's put that principle on the table first. People are responsible for their own choices. That was the framework. Now, fast forward to the discussion with Phantom and notice what changes. Now, the discussion isn't simply about whether Ben's comments were wrong. The discussion becomes whether other creators, listen carefully, have a responsibility to publicly and consistently condemn Ben. That's a different question. Let me just pause and remind folks what I said in my disclaimer. I don't condone any such behavior. All right? But that's a different question. Now, we're no longer talking about Ben's conduct. We're talking about Phantom's obligation. and other content creators' obligation, if there is that obligation or responsibility to take a public stand and denounce full throttle everything that a content creator does because another content creator wants or demands or thinks that's the way it should be. Is it a moral obligation? That could be a question. But let me just, and questions will come to me as I'm discussing this. So, we're talking about Phantom's obligation, because I was going to start talking about, is it everyone's content creators' obligation? And that's where I think tonight's discussion becomes fascinating, because now we have two competing philosophies. One philosophy says people are responsible for themselves. The other says there are moments when silence, continued association, or a lack of public condemnation becomes part of a moral issue itself. Neither philosophy is easy, because it's different philosophy, it's different opinions, principles, and neither philosophy is automatically right or wrong. I'm not saying that. But if we're going to evaluate consistency, don't you think we first have to understand the principles each person says they live by? Then compare those principles, we can do that, to the positions they are taking today. That's what this analysis is about. Not personalities, not popularity, not teams, but principles, I think. Let me just pause for a moment and think about that. So, why Lacey but not Ben? That was the bigger question, I think. I mean, you can put comments in the chat. Do you think it was handled in the right way? Could it have been handled another way? And then there were questions that were asked of Phantom. Did Phantom ever explain or answer the questions that were asked of him about the standard that he uses when he decided, or when he decides to, I'll just put the word criticize or condemn or denounce someone? What standard did he use? Because remember, the question became, did you say anything? Did you? And then once that question was answered, then it went to, how long did it take you to answer that? And then there was question on question on question that followed. Phantom, instead, he started explaining the event. Okay. So I'll put it into what I recall from the transcript. The way Phantom said Ben was drunk or had something, alcohol, and Ben has a foul mouth. I handled it. That's how it seems I recall he explained it. But does that explain thoroughly? Did that explain the criticism that was made so that it would be quote unquote understood? I also think during the conversation, the two both were talking past each other. And maybe some examples. Maggie asks a question. Are you going to do, no, this one I did write down. Are you going to do with Ben what you did with Lacey? Phantom answers, I already did. Maggie replied, no, you didn't. Who's right? Maybe both of them, because neither person defines the word do. To Maggie, do might mean a sustained campaign, repeated criticism, warning other content creators, consistent, public accountability. But to Phantom, do means, could it mean this? I condemned him. I removed him. I played the audio. Same word, but different definitions. Once people use the same word differently, the conversation almost always breaks down. So again, both talking, but were they talking past one another? Were they even talking about the same thing as far as their understanding of the questions and the answers? And then there was this timeline. I touched on it just briefly. Maggie says she watched it happen. Ben kept making the comments. I personally, so that people know, I did not listen to the actual video. All right. But Ben kept allegedly making the comments. And then Cat Medusa arrived. Phantom stayed. And Ben wasn't immediately removed. But then Phantom tells another story or a different story. First, he wasn't there. And if I'm listening correctly, then he says he was listening. Then he says he removed Ben in that timeline. He didn't know how long it took. Was he expected to know, how many minutes, how long it took? I think he answered that. Then, do you think the timing, let me just ask it this way, another way. Do you think the timing should have mattered? Because at one point, that was part of the questioning, the line of questioning and continuous questioning. How long did it take him to realize or recognize and then denounce what Ben was saying immediate removal was the expectation. So do you think the timing, if it took 5 minutes, that was too long? Once he said he was listening to hear first what was being said. Now, the disagreement wasn't what been said. That wasn't the disagreement between the two. At this point, it was the amount of time it took to tell Ben about it and then, handle the situation. When did Phantom know? That's what the disagreement becomes. At this point, when did Phantom know, and how quickly did he respond? Those are factual questions, but how important was that? Meaning, did it take too long? Is 3 minutes, is 5 minutes? What would have been too long? Because that was one thing that was called into question. Okay. Then there was this question of standard. And I think that's a great question. Maggie asked what he thought would be his standard. And because principles matter, standards matter. So what behavior causes you to launch into a sustained campaign against one creator, but not another? I think it was put like that. And I kept waiting for Phantom to explain a standard. Now the question would become, did she have a right to ask him that question? Well, you can answer that, or you can ask the question, right? It's fair, they're questions. Did he have to explain or give an answer to all the questions that were asked? Or if you heard how he answered, were you satisfied? Because at one point, when the answer came, he said it didn't matter, but then Maggie came back and said it mattered to her, so she wanted an explanation. I think, though, they were talking past one another. And then something else that was, I guess you could say, much bigger in the argument was, you are the company you keep. As a principal, you are the company you keep. What do you think about that? If you repeatedly associate with someone, you own part of the responsibility, right? You don't have to agree with that, but it is, or is it not, a consistent principle? You are the company that you keep. We're content creators on this platform. Does that apply as content creators because someone comes up on your platform? Does the responsibility then lie upon the content creator to denounce the other person? Is it their responsibility? I'm talking about, we're content creators. or not to have them on our platform if you want to interview them. In other words, like, say, for example, myself, there are people that I have wanted to maybe bring up on my platform. Do you agree with that? The company you keep? Because that was an argument that was put forward. Again, you don't have to agree with that, but is it a consistent principle? Is it a consistent principle? Let's look at the parties that were arguing. The company they keep, can they agree or disagree? I think they have disagreed with the company that they keep. Or have they disagreed? I see Love 777 says, it depends on the definition of YouTube company. All right. Juju says, in my opinion, situations are put forth purposefully. The truth doesn't matter to many. Ivy says, not if you give a disclaimer before you add anyone to your platform. Good point. So again, you don't have to agree with that principle, do you? But it is a consistent principle that we hear about. And then I also remembered something else. There have been many people to come up on platforms. Maggie repeatedly said she didn't want to police people. She said that adults should make their own decisions. In this case, should that have been extended? Should that principle and what was said in the past during a very heated panel discussion, many, that people were free, to have their opinion and free to speak their mind. Fast forward, when having said adults should make up their own, minds and make their own decisions, should that have been extended? Or should a person be condemned based on what was said in that case? I don't want to repeat it. Should it have been equally applied? These are just questions about the discussion. No right or wrong, just opinions. She said she doesn't control anyone. Was that controlling? Was it fair? Would that be an exception because of the content that was referred to and how it was handled? Should her expectation, or any content creator's expectation, whatever they want to, let's just call it champion, for lack of a better word, if one content creator is passionate about a certain moral belief, principle, something that they want to stand for or condemn or moral authority on, should they expect all others to get behind them and be as passionate and responsible for making sure that that message is carried across all platforms and confront it? Is that fair? I mean, it's a legitimate question, because questions in and of themselves, they're questions. But what do you think about that? Should there ever be an exception? Now, this was again, I did not hear it. It's not that I don't doubt it at all. The way Phantom explained it, he said, foul mouth. Was that good enough? Did he go far enough? Does Maggie believe some conduct is so serious that it creates an exception? Should this have been immediately? In other words, was Phantom's reaction, the way he handled it? Did he act? Did his behavior? Did he condone it? Did he condemn it? Those were like, did you condemn it? The question. Are you going to condemn it? And his response, his understanding, again, talking past each other, he said he handled it. I'm not saying agreeing or disagreeing. Gaslighting has a specific meaning too. I'm not saying Phantom gaslighted her or not. What I'm saying or trying to say is this. Maggie believed he continually reframed the discussion instead of answering the question she had been asking from the very beginning. And she was at one point thinking or saying that he was trying to get to her, but that he wasn't, or she wasn't going to allow that to happen. Do you think he was being evasive? This quote unquote gaslighting. Again, it's, whether you agree with her is up to you. Whether you agree with Phantom, that's up to you too. Did he remove the person? Did he fulfill his responsibility? Should it end there? At the end, do you think Maggie was satisfied with the response and that he did enough? Do you think Phantom walked away satisfied that she understood? Because she kept saying, I need to understand. I want to understand. Asking the question. Do you think she fully understood? So, am I morally obligated to continue to publicly denounce that person? Do you think, as content creators, that we can control that? And if someone doesn't do what we'd like them to do, then they're automatically dismissed? Or is every adult ultimately responsible for his or her own speech? Because those are two very different philosophies. They are. If I were to have someone on my platform who is racist, does that mean I support what they think? Can you police on this platform. Morality. Yes. Ivy says, I believe everyone should run their platform as they see fit, and the consequences will come from your subscribers to stay or go. Very good point. Can I call for the cancellation, or maybe the question should be, should I, as a content creator, call for the cancellation of other content creators on this platform if it is a moral issue? Should that be acceptable? Should people just go arm in arm in lockstep because someone calls for cancellation of content creators? Who am I as the moral authority on this platform? Sure, I can have my own beliefs and my own thoughts, but can I control what another person says or does on their platform? I can disagree with it, but can I control it? I don't think so. But there are people on this platform who want to control other content creators. But can you control? That's not freedom. We are all adults on this platform. And in this sector, we can have a difference of opinion. We have our own beliefs and our own principles. Can I control a friend? It's not who shouted the loudest, not who got the last word, but whether the questions being asked were ever truly answered. So tonight wasn't really about Maggie, or it wasn't really about Phantom. It wasn't even really about Ben. It was about something much bigger, about how we reason, about whether we apply our principles consistently.